Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly massive piece of music history. We're talking about the Beatles' One, that record-breaking compilation album that totally redefined the music industry right at the dawn of the 21st century. But here's the thing, this isn't just a story about off-the-charts commercial success. It's actually a bit of a mystery. We're going to look at how one of the greatest bands in history put together their ultimate track list, and why, thanks to a seriously quirky twist of chart history, one of their absolute undisputed masterpieces was left completely off the record.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp the sheer scale of this album, we've got to look at the jaw-dropping numbers. Released on November 13th, 2000, which happened to be the 30th anniversary of the band's breakup, One was an absolute commercial juggernaut. It sold a mind-blowing 31 million copies worldwide. It dominated charts across the globe, and get this, it became the single best-selling album of the entire 2000s decade. Just let that sink in for a second. 30 years after they broke up, the Beatles were literally outselling every single contemporary artist on the planet.
But here's the catch. This wasn't just some random collection of their best songs, slapped together. It was built on an incredibly strict, data-driven set of rules. Producer George Martin, along with surviving band members Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, agreed on a very specific black and white criteria. A song could only make the cut if it hit #1 on the UK Record Retailer Top 50 chart, or if it hit #1 on the US Billboard Hot 100 chart. No exceptions. It was a purely mathematical approach to curating their legacy.
So that brings us to the central mystery of today's explainer. If this album is supposed to be the definitive collection of the Beatles' greatest achievements, why on earth is one of their most groundbreaking, iconic, and culturally significant releases totally missing? I'm talking, of course, about the legendary double-A side single, Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane. A lot of people consider this to be their absolute creative peak, yet Strawberry Fields Forever is literally nowhere to be found on One. To figure out why, we have to do a little time travel.
Let's jump back to February 17, 1967. This was the exact moment the band returned with their first new music in 6 months, which, let's be honest, in 1960s pop music time is basically a lifetime. They hadn't put out a studio album for Christmas, just a compilation. So when they finally dropped Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane, it wasn't just a regular new release. It was a total pop music shockwave. The Beatles had completely and radically reinvented themselves, both in how they sounded and how they looked. To really understand just how radical this reinvention was, you have to hear this hilarious, genuinely bewildered reaction from a teenager on American Bandstand in 1967. After watching the new promotional films for the single, she just flat out said, "I don't like their hair and mustache. It ruins their image." And honestly, that perfectly captures the cultural whiplash the band was causing. Those lovable, suited-up mop tops were gone, and in their place were these full-blown psychedelic pioneers. And the confusion definitely didn't stop there. Take a listen to another quote from that exact same broadcast. "They're ugly, their mustaches are weird, they're like grandfathers or something." I mean, ouch. The avant-garde promotional films, which were directed by Swedish TV producer Peter Goldman, had these weird tree pianos, horses, and the guys wearing completely different wild clothes. It completely baffled their traditional screaming teenage fan base who, frankly, just wanted the boy band they'd fallen in love with a couple of years earlier. Now, what's super fascinating here is how incredibly divided the critical reception was between the two songs on this double-A side. Critics described Strawberry Fields Forever as dirgy, depressing, and just packed with weird effects, flutes, and cellos. They recognized it was advanced and massively compelling, sure, but also a bit overly technical and confusing for a pop song. Penny Lane, on the flip side, was instantly recognized as the perkier track. It was jaunty, catchy, had a really sturdy beat, and featured that bright trumpet obligato. It was hands down the much more commercial-sounding song of the two. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what went down when this complex avant-garde masterpiece hit the UK charts. The Beatles suddenly ran into an incredibly unlikely rival. By midweek, the Beatles had racked up around 350,000 sales for their new single. Not bad, right? But out of nowhere, a traditional crooner named Engelbert Humperdinck was sitting pretty at almost 500,000 sales. Yeah, you heard that right. Engelbert Humperdinck was actually outselling the greatest, most famous rock band in the world. So the really crucial point here is the massive irony of this whole chart battle. On one side, you have the Beatles absolutely pushing the boundaries of popular music with an experimental, psychedelic progression, and on the other side, you've got Engelbert Humperdinck's Release Me, which was this incredibly safe, traditional, housewife-friendly pop ballad. And in the UK charts of early 1967, the traditional, safe ballad was winning. Which leads us right to this shocking number, 2. Thanks to Engelbert Humperdinck's absolute monster sales, the Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane single stalled out at number 2 in the UK. And it just sat there for 3 weeks. This was a massive, massive deal at the time because it officially broke the Beatles' legendary streak of consecutive number 1 hits for the very first time since Love Me Do.
Meanwhile, over in the United States, things played out a little differently, but with the exact same ultimate consequence for Strawberry Fields. See, in the US, the Billboard charts counted the two sides of a single separately, based mostly on radio play. And because Penny Lane was the much more accessible, catchy track, radio DJs loved it, and it soared straight to number 1. Strawberry Fields Forever, being the weirder, trippier track, got left behind, peaking way down at number 16.
All right, so let's see how all of this builds back into our main story. Fast forward again to November 13, 2000, the 30th anniversary of the breakup and the day Ones was released. Remember those incredibly strict, rigid, data-driven rules that George Martin and the band agreed upon for the track list? Well, here is exactly where all the narrative dots connect. The compilation included 27 total number 1 hits. But because Strawberry Fields Forever stalled at number 2 in the UK behind our guy Humperdinck, and because it only hit number 16 in the US while Penny Lane stole the top spot, it completely failed to meet the criteria. That quirky, weird 1967 chart battle literally sealed its fate. One of the absolute greatest masterpieces in the history of recorded music was locked out of the band's biggest compilation by their very own rigid rules. Wild, right? Even with that glaring omission, the sales data from the year 2000 is just an absolute spectacle to behold. The Beatles, armed with music that was at that point over 3 decades old, sold 13.8 million copies in that year alone. They were completely dominating global sales, going head-to-head and winning against absolute modern titans of the era, like Eminem, Britney Spears, and Santana. It officially secured the Beatles a 4th distinct decade in which they placed an album at number 1. And the astronomical runaway success of One sent massive shockwaves through the entire music industry all over again. It triggered this huge wave of copycat greatest hits albums. Suddenly, we had Elvis Presley's ELV-1S in 2002, Michael Jackson's number 1s in 2003, and the Bee Gees' number 1s in 2004. Even that iconic pop art yellow 1 on a red background heavily influenced the minimalist cover designs of pretty much all these subsequent compilations.
But hey, let's take a step back and ground this explainer where it belongs, in the music itself. The Beatles' former press officer, Derek Taylor, wrote a really poignant contemporary review back in 1967 that perfectly captures the deep emotional resonance of this omitted masterpiece. He wrote, "Strawberry Fields is beautiful. I find it unbearably sad and full of pain. What can you say about the Beatles that hasn't already been said? I think it's a great reminder that beneath all the charts, the massive sales data, and the strict rules of a compilation album, there lies some seriously, deeply affecting art." Which brings us to our final thought for today's explainer. The Beatles' One is undeniably a masterclass in commercial dominance. It's practically the peak of pop success. Yet, the total absence of Strawberry Fields Forever serves as this incredibly fascinating footnote in music history. So I want to leave you with a provocative question to ponder. In the end, what really matters more to history? The strict commercial chart rules that dictate a compilation, or the enduring, groundbreaking artistic legacy of the songs themselves? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking the big questions.